Hi, this isn't going to be 5-MeO DMT 101. We're going to learn about, talk about dissociation. It's been an area that in my years as a practitioner has been a keen interest of mine. You're going to hear that word a lot. We're going to learn a lot of dense phrases, some funky terms, and some fancy words along the way, okay? So, dissociation has long been conceptualized primarily as a pathological or maladaptive response to trauma, a fragmentation of self to be resolved through conscious awareness and cognitive processing. However, what if dissociation, under certain conditions, could instead be a doorway to profound healing? I'm going to explore this possibility, focusing on what's called complete psychological dissociation, or a full release facilitated through 5-MeO DMT. I'll get to those terms soon enough, and just for the sake of brevity, I'm not going to say 5-MeO DMT a number of times. I'm just going to say 5, okay? So I'm going to challenge established trauma-informed paradigms and broaden the definition of dissociation. So I'm going to propose a trauma-informed approach that recognizes the therapeutic validity of states of complete dissociation. I'm going to emphasize the necessity of rigorous ethical standards and specialized training to responsibly optimize the therapeutic potential of 5, and advocate for practices grounded in embodied wisdom and experiential competence. So this presentation is going to bridge, hopefully, some clinical, experiential, and theoretical perspectives, inviting researchers, clinicians, and practitioners to expand their understanding of dissociation, of healing, and the vast potential residing at the intersection of trauma-informed care and 5 experiences. We have researchers here. We have research as a part of the community of practice. There's theory. There's established leaders who have talked about and established what we understand of trauma in the body, and then there's practice in the field of 5-MeO DMT. That's me, for example. I have 9 years of full-time practice with 5, serving around 900 individuals, totaling about 1,300 experiences. Let's get right into structural dissociation theory, which is the dominant clinical perspective that defines dissociation as a separation of some aspects of mental functioning from conscious awareness. So whether it be Bessel van der Kolk, Stephen Porges, Peter Levine, Judith Herman, these leaders have pointed out the nature of dissociation that is widely considered to be foundational. Bessel van der Kolk: dissociation is the essence of trauma. The overwhelming experience is split off and fragmented so that emotions, sounds, images, thoughts, and physical sensations related to the trauma take on a life of their own. Now, I'm going to introduce an early pioneer with 5. He was quoted in an earlier presentation, Ralph Metzner. Now, Ralph Metzner wrote a book, The Toad and the Jaguar, that was a summary, basically, of his years of underground experimentation. And during that experimentation, he recognized a threshold, which he called complete psychological dissociation. He described this as unconsciousness of one's own bodily postures and gestures, vocalizations and verbalizations, as well as more or less total disconnect of awareness of one's surroundings. So, even though he established and distinguished complete psychological dissociation from the range of dissociation in structural dissociation theory, that didn't mean that he championed complete psychological dissociation. In fact, he developed an ROA, which was insufflation, and different therapeutic methodologies to avoid that. So I'm going to challenge the traditional assumptions that therapeutic resolution of trauma must involve conscious awareness and active cognitive processing. I'm going to build explicitly upon Metzner's distinction as a foundational concept, essentially as an addition to the definition of dissociation. If we look at the definition on the left-hand side, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't change that. On the left-hand side, we have the definition from the dictionary, and in the field of psychiatry, dissociation is the separation of some aspects of mental functioning from conscious awareness, leading to a degree of mental dysfunction or to mental conditions. Now, if we look in the middle definition, this is Metzner's definition of complete psychological dissociation. This is unconsciousness of one's own bodily postures and gestures, vocalizations and verbalization, as well as more or less total disconnect of awareness of one's surrounding. Metzner's definition aligns very closely with the definition of unconscious, which we can see on the right-hand side, which is a state in which one is not awake and aware of and responding to one's environment. So he recognizes this state of complete psychological dissociation as distinct, just as perhaps an unconscious state is distinct from any range of wakeful or conscious baseline states. So my theoretical framework is going to build off of this foundational concept of Ralph Metzner's and will propose a further distinction between two pathways towards unconsciousness, also in the specific context of 5, submission and surrender. So let's look at this little chart on the left-hand side. At the top, you see the word unconsciousness. I'm going to take this to mean basically to be synonymous with complete psychological dissociation, as well as what we call a full release. Now, you can see that there are two pathways leading to unconsciousness. One is a transcendent pathway, one is a dissociative pathway. And there are two qualities leading to those pathways. One is surrender, and one is submission. Now, we're going to turn into this pretty dense phrase on the right-hand side. Transcendence is conscious dissociation. Dissociation is unconscious transcendence. Okay? Following the left-hand pathway, transcendence is conscious dissociation. This relates to surrender. And on the right-hand side, dissociation is unconscious transcendence. This relates to submission. Submission leads to a dissociative pathway. Submission describes an involuntary, defensive reaction marked by overwhelm, ineffective resistance, and fragmentation, which is consistent with the dominant clinical observation of a maladaptive mechanism. Think of flight, fight, freeze, hyper or hypoarousal dysregulation of the nervous system. Now, in contrast, on the left-hand side, surrender represents an intentional, conscious release into complete dissociation, a deliberate letting go into unconsciousness. There is internal consent, there is a yes. Now, surrender often leads to therapeutic transformation without explicit cognitive processing, demonstrating that profound healing and resolution of trauma can occur within this state. So, expanding this framework directly challenges the prevailing trauma-informed paradigm, which advocates for a more inclusive and nuanced understanding of dissociation within therapeutic practices, particularly those with 5, and specifically 5 experiences where there is what is called a full release. So what is a full release? An event and state characterized by complete ego dissolution, complete dissociation, or a complete loss of conscious awareness. A full release, as potentially experienced in 5 journeys, is indescribable or ineffable. I'm not going to F the ineffable here this morning, but let's say that unlike other substance-induced states that amplify sensory, emotional, or cognitive phenomena for conscious engagement, the full release dissolves these entirely in accordance with complete psychological dissociation on consciousness. So I'm using this terminology instead of the words you see in the word cloud, simply to point out that this state, at that event, the event horizon, this threshold, there is no subject to experience or analyze content. There's no observer to generate insight, and no conscious participation in the therapeutic process as traditionally conceived. Despite this, the impact of completely dissociating via transcendence is compelling. Case examples from my own practice, not to mention the research that was just presented and others, demonstrate that individuals who surrender fully into this state frequently report profound transformations, shifts that often manifest not through remembered insight, but through ensuing shifts in emotional patterns, relational dynamics, or an embodied sense of clarity and relief. So, my hypothesis is that there are somatic, affective, and psychological constrictions, to use words by Judith Blackstone, that obfuscate fundamental consciousness from being more apparent. The mechanism that seems to be intrinsic to exogenous 5 entering the body is that it allows repressed material and all that it suppresses to be revealed. Somehow, as though laying dormant, material that has been buried, stuck, lodged, gets to come out. It penetrates through the constrictions of individual consciousness, the self-identifier. It comes through the mind, the individual psyche. It also comes from the individual psyches of our relations, our forefathers, our ancestors, and that lineage goes all the way back, perhaps even beyond the first human, perhaps to life itself. It is cosmic in scale and nature. It comes from the storehouse of all experience and comes through, penetrates us. It's the psycho-cosmic penetralia. What is this? I call it the divinely arising presentations from the broadest recesses of memory. So although the full release can resemble other unconscious states, think of deep sleep, think of coma, think of fainting, think of general anesthesia, where there is no animation in the body beyond the autonomic functions continuing, the full release can also feature dynamic presentations, including catharsis, glossolalia, erratic movements, vocalization, purging, or psychodramatic expressions and abreactions. These phenomena, though often incomprehensible to observers, are the emergence of deeply embedded psycho-cosmic material. And that material, now exposed in the full release phase, is playing itself out in real-time theater and has the potential to be resolved once and for all. How do I know that? Well, beyond the anecdotes I could share with you, where's the data? So, the truth is, at this moment, I don't have any data. However, I'm not a scientist, right? I'm not a researcher. But I have started a research project. I don't know anything about qualitative data or spreadsheets, but I do have a lot of collected data, and so I've begun to look at it. Now, that data comes from my private practice. I offer therapy-assisted 5 experiences. I've been using the same structured format since 2020, and there is no dosing template. A little analysis has begun on a small sample, 13 participants who had a minimum of 4 sessions between 2020 and 24. That totals 72 sessions altogether, including, in my estimation, between 30 and 45 samadhis, so breakthroughs. That's a lot of enlightenment. When we start doing qualitative comparative analysis, the arguments I'm making here will be obviously scrutinized by the outcome. In the meantime, I'm left with my notes. I'm left with my anecdotal offerings from 9 years in the field. Whatever the results are, I believe that this is going to better inform how we study experiences with 5 and how we can care for the people who have experiences with 5. In the world of substances and psychedelia, integration is the buzzword, and I think there's a lot of good methods applying to supporting people in having constructive, positive outcomes and impacts with substances. And yet, 5 seems to have a unique function, and so integrating that requires some additional considerations. I'm going to repeat here. What has occurred during a full release does not primarily rely on cognitive recall or narrative reconstruction of what happened, but on embodying and adapting to changes. So in my perspective, there are 2 critical aspects of integration unique to full release experiences: real-time integration and adapting to spontaneous change. Real-time integration refers to the potential for the resolution of spontaneous presentations of psychological burdens, traumas, or otherwise deeply repressed material, the psychocosmic penetralia, during the unconscious state itself. The practitioner may take an active role in a participant's experience as a response to what's happening, only if it's clear. I won't spend too much time on this aspect of working directly with the penetralia because it is advanced work. Making interventions, not to be confused with a prescriptive facilitation, requires advanced skills, developed intuition, and nuanced consent protocols tailored specifically to states of complete dissociation or amnesia. Such interventions carry significant risks, including possible re-traumatization if perceived abreactions are mishandled. So practitioners should ideally undergo rigorous training, mentorship, and supervised practice to learn how to navigate these complex phenomena safely and effectively. So, adapting to spontaneous change. I had a whiteout and I don't remember anything. This is something that we often hear with a full release experience. And so after the full release, the integration centers on adapting to transformations that have resulted from spontaneously emergent material, even when conscious recall of the material is absent. Unlike conventional models where a lack of recall might be viewed as avoidant or a protective bypass, or at least in the case of I had a whiteout, something must be wrong, right? That effective integration post-full release hinges on recognizing the legitimacy and therapeutic value of corrective experiences brought on by transcendent full release experiences. So adapting to spontaneous change is looking forward. This is where we can leave behind what was and embrace what is felt now and what we aspire to. Can a practitioner, a clinician, or a researcher support an individual in their experience of amnesia? Yes, and it begins with an expanded framework that includes the value of the full release. So, some guidelines for practitioners and clinicians: normalize memory gaps to proactively prepare individuals for possible amnesia during sessions. Memory gaps don't signify therapeutic failure. Offer clear rationale. Provide understandable explanations tailored to individual comprehension for amnesia and unconscious, so to mitigate confusion and distress, manage recall expectations, skillfully navigate expectations, recognizing that when somebody is trying to cognitively reconstruct their experience, it could be counterproductive. So this is perhaps the critical factor, submission or surrender. To evaluate whether the pathway to unconsciousness was via submission or surrender, one needs to assess the individual's experiences of that having been overwhelming or empowering through both observational tracking and sensitive client-centered inquiry. It's unlikely that a submission approach results in a corrective experience. Corrective experiences are much more likely to occur with a surrender approach. Practitioners must skillfully assess these outcomes through the careful tracking that I mentioned. That happens prior to a session, the sessions themselves, and all of the interviews or conversations after. Reliable assessment involves matching the practitioner's observations of the phenomena and their self-reporting of that phenomena. And finally, there needs to be know-how in which I think takes place in the apprenticeship with 5-MeO-DMT. So clinicians, researchers, practitioners need to have some sort of experience. So in challenging traditional trauma care, the conventional models must broaden their conceptualization of dissociation, recognizing complete dissociation through transcendence as potentially therapeutic rather than something to avoid. The framework on the right is a more inclusive approach. The broadened approach requires a reevaluation of assumptions, ultimately enriching the field of trauma care by lifting the cap off of what was thought of as possible. So, how can facilitators and clinicians alike level up? So the regulated field, academic institutions, sanctioned private entities, regulatory bodies, could take a few pages. Oh, did I not do that? No, thank you. Could take a few pages from the unregulated fields playbooks, notably the Conclave's ethical commitments and others, publications, though rare, like The Toad and the Jaguar, collectives in the underground who establish best practices, codes of ethics, current training programs or clinical trials that offer a weekend certification or a course or using routes of administration that are not readily tested in the field are inadequate, to put it mildly, to prepare clinicians and researchers for navigating the delicate, precious, full release, potentially placing participants at risk of re-traumatization or other adverse effects. So to mitigate those risks, I advocate for comprehensive experiential training protocols that encompass theoretical knowledge and practical competencies specific to 5 experiences. Such training should emphasize ethical considerations, care principles, and supervised clinical experience. There's me at my home in Montreal preparing for an intramuscular study. I'm also a part of the 5 training program, which is at Tandava, Mexico, that was already spoken of. So, as a little conclusion, the transformative mechanism intrinsic to 5 experiences points to something universal. It's a mechanism that transcends autobiography, reaching into ancestral and even cosmic dimensions, constrictions of somatic, affective, psychological, and cognitive nature obscure access to fundamental consciousness. When the self-identifier ceases to experience, when not only object is absent, but subject too, as in the full release, buried material from the individual, the familial, the ancestral, the collective psyche, it surfaces, releasing what has long been held in repression. This psychocosmic penetralia surfaces from the deepest recesses we can imagine to penetrate the crusty bark of our most superficial identity, who we think we are. in order for our essence to be freed, liberated, healed, cleared, purified, so we can continue on feeling empathy, compassion, acceptance, forgiveness, and a sense of purpose in just being undefended, whole, wise, full spectrum. Why else would we be doing this, really? Thank you. One last thing before I go into questions. One day, my anecdotal reflections and insights can and will be backed up by some qualitative data. But given that I'm in an unregulated field, not a part of any academic institutions or private research, which means no funding, no grants, no fellowships, etc., my data collection and analysis is funded by myself and crowdsourced as well. So if you'd like to learn about my project, take the 5 minutes to read the description of the project on this fundraiser. Just scan the QR code, take a photo out of it you need. Part of that data set is taking about 300 individuals who were with me over the course of 5 years, which includes a little over 500 documented sessions using inhalation and injection as a route of administration in a context of psycholytic therapy and psychedelic therapy. All right, now questions. Thank you.